I'm not sure what the favorite things about general session are for you, whether it's the music or the reports or the debates. They're all good. But for me, I like the music. So thank you. I want to introduce the delegates to a new way of discerning complex issues. I spoke to it a little bit this morning. Before we have to debate and vote on them, depending on what your reactions will be and the surveys that follow this general session, we'll expand that as we go forward. UUs for Justice in the Middle East have secured the necessary signatures required by our bylaws to bring a business resolution to this General Assembly. It's for the delegates to embrace or reject. It has been perfected and distributed to you this morning, and that'll be the basis of the mini-assembly this afternoon to make amendments to that as the delegates see fit. As this business resolution has moved through the process for presentation to the delegates, the Socially Responsible Investment Committee has been concurrently doing their job of renewing holdings in the Common Endowment Fund. In this role, they have been utilizing the services of Sustainalytics, which applies screens based on criteria directed by the Socially Responsible Investment Committee, guided by votes of General Assembly delegates and the UUA board. The most recent such screening resulted in the elimination of certain holdings which did not pass the Sustainalytics human rights screen. There was no vote taken by the board or the investment committee with regard to divestment, but rather the usual balancing of the fund in the usual course of the committee's work. So we are now at a place where the business resolution as presented in the program book has been modified by the handout that you got this morning in conjunction with council. UUs for Justice in the Middle East, the makers of this business resolution, have modified the language to reflect this new reality, and that will be what will be discussed this afternoon in the mini-assembly. It will be held at 4:45 in Union Station, Ballroom C. So those of you who want to influence the language of this business resolution should plan on being there. It is not the place to debate the pros and cons. That'll be here tomorrow. With that as a backdrop, I want to invite 5 people to the stage. Donna Ashrawi, member of the First UU Church of Houston. Farrell Brody, member of the First UU Church of Columbus. He didn't drive far. Denny Davidoff, member of the Unitarian Church in Westport, Connecticut. The Reverend Jay Woolen, minister at the UU Congregation of the Quad Cities in Davenport, Iowa. And John Saruf, principal of Public Conversations Project in Watertown, Mass. The Public Conversations Project fosters constructive conversations where there is conflict driven by differences in identity, beliefs, and values. And so I've invited John to facilitate a conversation among these 4 people with different views on the business resolution to help the delegates understand the complexities of what you're being asked to support or oppose. And frankly, I also want to model a better way of discerning how we UUs live out our values in a complex world that challenge competing values or put us at odds with each other, and frankly may be difficult to reduce to a simple yes or no, pro or con. So John, I invite you to facilitate this conversation. I think we're all eager to hear it.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for making this important space. Thank you all for being here. The Public Conversations Project is honored to be a part of this important conversation, one that we know carries with it a lot of feelings and convictions that understandably run deep. We know that behind every belief is a story, and that behind every story is a person. Can we, in our deliberations over the most important decisions, hear each other's stories? Can we see each other as people? And even across the great differences that divide us, can people stay in community and continue the important work that they want to do together? The debate will happen. It will happen tomorrow, and it will continue, no doubt. This is an opportunity to model a different kind of engagement, a different kind of discernment. To be advocates in relationship with other advocates, remaining curious and willing to engage. And that is what our four guests have volunteered to do today, and we are grateful to them for their willingness to share so openly in such a public way. And all of them have agreed to keep to the time limits that we'll have so that everybody can be heard equally, to allow people to speak without being interrupted, to refrain from trying to convince other people on stage to change their position, to critique positions and not the people themselves, and to speak on behalf of themselves and not on behalf of some group. So I'm going to just start by asking you, Jay, and each person will have 3 minutes to answer. Can you speak of an experience you've had that will help people understand how you came to your views on the issue of how to decide whether the UU should hold investments related to human rights issues in the Palestinian territories, and maybe speak about a core value that informs your discernment?
Certainly, thank you. And thank you. Good morning, everybody. I was born and raised in the Reformed Jewish tradition, and the experience that informs me is anti-Semitism of my family and of the Jewish people. My grandparents, who were born in Lithuania, beaten, house burnt down, forced to leave Lithuania to come to America, and thankfully, because otherwise, all likelihood, they might have died in the Holocaust. And forced then, when they came to America, to work in, just whatever they could do to earn money. My parents, my father, one child of 5 sisters, they all saved to send him to college. And his opportunities, what colleges he could go to, were limited, as he was excluded from many colleges because of his religion. What jobs he could get were limited because of his religion. And then myself, prior to going into ministry, I was in the business world. Many times I myself was subjected to being called a kike, being told, drew them down, even though they knew I was a Unitarian Universalist. But you see, just because I was born and raised, they attributed the same anti-Semitism, the same discrimination that they were raised to believe in. And so, and as well, I think about my local temple, where I live in Iowa, has to have police guards every service because they have swastikas put on their temple, they have threats on an ongoing basis. And so the value that I present that really informs me about this is refuge. That the state of Israel is a place of refuge for Jewish people who have been historically oppressed, who have been thrown out of countries, thrown out of their own country, first by the Babylonians, and then by the Romans. And then as the diaspora went, they were excluded from country to country, even ones they were very highly integrated in. And so they made their way back to their historic homeland, and then even before World War II, and after the Holocaust, that just increased. And then after, of course, the creation of the State of Israel, other Jews now from our surrounding areas in the Arab world and as well in Africa and even farther, even America. They know it is a place of last refuge that they can go to, a Jewish homeland, where they will stand up for themselves and will not sacrifice themselves and be a scapegoat for others' discrimination.
Thank you.
This
Thank you,
is
Jay.
For 3 minutes?
For 3 minutes, Farrell.
Okay. I understand this is a difficult one for a lot of people. I don't know if you've read the resolution. This is a very beautiful resolution, in my opinion. First, as a Jew, I have to say that most of my life, I've tried to live up to what I believe is the best in Judaism, which is called tikkun olam, fixing of the world, not destroying the world, not subjugating people, not occupying, building for the future, for the people of our species, for all of our species, and for the planet. So this resolution represents me as a Jew. As a UU, everything I believe in our 7 principles is really here, especially the parts that talk about our compassion, our desire for equity in human relations. All of that is meaningful to me as an individual, as a Jew, as a UU. When I look at the companies involved in this resolution, they are not interested in my Jewish ethics. They are not interested in my UU ethics, my UU beliefs. They're interested in money, and I would call it blood money, because what they are getting is money from an occupation of Palestinians.
Farrell, I wonder if we can just call you back to that, the value and where that comes from for you.
That comes from several places. One is that in 1957, I was driving a Caterpillar tractor on a kibbutz, and right up to the edge of the Gaza Strip is where I was working. Across on the other side of that little ditch that separated Israel from what was then Egypt were poor Palestinian farmers. I recognized immediately the incredible imbalance of power that even existed then, and of course I feel still exists today. And one more. In 1963, I asked a very wise man, what can be done about this situation? And he said to me, what do you want to do about this situation? Are you just going to talk about it? Are you going to work to do something? And I said, thank you, Dr. Buber. It was Martin Buber who told me to do something. And so from that moment on, I realized that that's what I had to do in this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Farrell. Demi?
I was born in March of 1932 to educated parents who were first-generation Americans, the children of Ashkenazi immigrants from Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Poland, Latvia. My extended family childhood in a beachside community in Queens, New York, was middle class, conservative Jewish, New Deal political, and materially safe. But the Nazi Wehrmacht, the plight and death of family members in Europe, the Holocaust, World War II, and the need for establishing a Jewish homeland in Israel were always the dominant themes in my home, in the Temple Bethel Religious School, at family and community gatherings. My dad worked with the PTA to undo the influence on kindergartners and first graders at Public School 114, whose teachers were disciples of Father Coughlin and Gerald L.K. Smith and their America First movement. My dad and his friends from the Temple Bethel Men's Group raised money for the Haganah. I learned early on to always be able to identify the people who, were I ever in danger because I was a Jew, could be counted on for unconditional help. The barricades, we used to call it, among my cousins. So I am a birthright Zionist. Zionism is in my bones and in my soul. I believe in the right of the Jewish people, my Jewish people, to have an undisputed homeland in Israel.
Thank you, Denis. Appreciate it. Dana?
Good morning. I was sensitized since birth to the UU principle of respect for the inherent worth and dignity of all human life, and to the core value of love and action. I'm a third-generation UU, and the Reverend Theodore Parker is in my family tree. I was very proud to hear as a child of his courage in being part of a minority of clergy who spoke out against slavery. My grandmother, Edith Parker, modified a Unitarian covenant to be the dinnertime grace, and we still say it today on occasion. Love is the spirit of this home and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. I came home from elementary school one day with my first ethnic joke and proceeded to tell it to my mother, the daughter of Polish immigrants. It did not go well. But using her UU values, she gently educated me that we do not tell ethnic jokes because they're hurtful, and furthermore, don't you dare laugh at them ever. So sensitized to these values, I eventually met my life partner, Ibrahim, who happened to be a Palestinian, and oddly, very much like my father, who was not Palestinian. Together, we raised 3 children who have benefited from many UU affiliations, and I've had the privilege to visit Israel as well as the occupied Palestinian territories twice, West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. Such a beautiful land, dynamic people, deep history, and so much oppression. I've also been to South Africa during apartheid, and I see in that time and place and the visits that I made denial of dignity in different ways. I saw military checkpoints blocking access to normal life. I think 500 or so in a place the size of Maryland. Very unnerved to see armed soldiers very much present. It was very intimidating to me. Horrified that a relative with a medical emergency had to go from one ambulance to another at a checkpoint, which is very routine, and this same relative was forced to kneel in the hot sun for 4 hours on a sidewalk because he refused to get his ID out immediately for a soldier's perusal. I saw Palestinian homes that were bulldozed by military orders because one member of the family had been arrested. The whole family was made homeless. And this just really disturbed me deeply. So these are the experiences that have informed me to be the person I am today, that feels that we need to not profit from companies that enable the types of human rights abuses that I have seen.
Thank you, Dana. So these issues are complex. Can you speak about ways that you feel pulled in multiple directions about this question, either because of competing values or because of the relationships you have? And because we're limited in time, I'm going to ask you each to speak for about 1 minute about ways in which you feel sort of pulled in different directions about this. Can I start with you, Jay?
Sure. So, of course, there is human suffering. I mean, the Palestinians are suffering as a people, and that pains me, and it does. I don't agree with many of the actions of the Israeli government, their expansion of the settlements, and so I struggle with that as well. And yet my goal is, how do we find peace so that both Israelis, both Jewish and Arab Israelis, can know that they can live in peace, where leaders of the Palestinians have consistently over the years called for the destruction of the state of Israel. And so how do we balance that against the needs of the people who are suffering? And how do we find peace? Ultimately, that is the question, is how do we find peace without punishment of a people?
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I understand. I really, I feel much the same way. And I know how difficult this resolution is for Denny and for Reverend Jay. But it's not an anti-Semitic, it's not an anti-Jewish resolution. If anything, it's anti those companies that are carrying out what I feel is something that is really against my principles as a UU and as a Jew. So I'm caught, you know, feeling and understanding what they are saying, hoping that we can both end up working for the same thing in the future, because our church, you know, our church is worth more. It's more valuable than what these companies are doing. We're worth more than that. We're better than that. And that's a struggle for me to understand some of the things that are opposed to the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Denise?
I wrote down pretty much what Jay had said, but I've just sat here and had, I think, an amazing insight. Learned from my grandson, who spoke to the CSI on corporate, on what corporations are doing to us as a culture, all of us, to our country, Citizens United and all of that. And what you said, Farrell, just awoken that in me. I don't want to be held hostage by Caterpillar. I don't want to give up the Jews' right to a homeland, or my disgust at Benjamin Netanyahu's government and what's being done with the settlements on the left bank. But the issue is actually not about that. This issue of divestiture has to do with the greed and corruption of corporate America, holding all of us hostage. Oh my God.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise. Dana?
Well, I thank the Black Lives Matter movement for giving me an epiphany last year of realizing, really, the UU movement, sometimes kicking and screaming over the century and a half or so, has been about holding up oppressed lives as mattering. We have such a good history of supporting women's rights and gay rights, LGBTQI rights, immigrant rights, women's reproductive freedom, Jewish rights. Our saints, the Sharps, went to Europe and saved Jewish children from the Holocaust. And I think the trick in this issue is to be sure that we're holding up Jewish lives as mattering, Israeli lives as mattering, and Palestinian lives as mattering. And I agree with Denny that we're being held hostage by corporate America and blood money.
Thank you all for sharing so personally. A large part of the purpose of this presentation is to model the genuine engagement that the UUA wants to inspire across its faith community. One way that the Public Conversations Project does this is to invite people to ask genuinely curious questions of one another, to try to come to a deeper understanding of what others believe, and to allow people to be more fully understood. So would like to use the few minutes that we have left to allow each of you to ask another person on stage a genuinely curious question. The purpose of that question is to understand some part of that person's experience or perspective more deeply. And we only have a few minutes, so we'll try to speak briefly.
So, Farrell, tomorrow we will debate. I don't even know which side I'm going to be on.
You can be on my side.
But here's my question. If we vote yes to a resolution which will ask the UUA to do something it's already done, will that make us feel good? I mean, will we have done something to bring peace among the Jews and the Palestinians? I mean, is that the issue to get so excited about? I mean, is that the real work, Farrell?
Oh, there's a lot of real work to be done. You know, it's not ending here. It's not ending at this GA. It's going on into the future. And it's a step forward, in my opinion. It's a step forward. It's not an end. It will not give us peace tomorrow. But it is a step forward. We're not the only ones who are doing this. There are churches all over this country who are doing the same thing, and pretty much for the same reasons. I know how you feel.
The Methodists don't have anything better than
I know you were going to cry. You even said you might cry up here on the stage. But I think it is a step forward. I think this church deserves to do this because it's something that we all really, I think, believe in down deep, and it's something that we will work for in the future as well. Thank you for your question.
I know how I'm going to vote tomorrow, but I guess my question would be, you know, I went to there was an event last night, and there were some really beautiful, powerful testimonies from some Palestinian Americans and Palestinians. But you know, one of the comments that caught my attention was occupation for 50 years. And so what I hear when I hear that, I'm not saying they meant this, but what I hear is that means they do not accept the existence of the state of Israel. And so I would like to know, do you accept the existence of the state of Israel as a Jewish state? And would you promote that in our work for peace?
I would. I really believe that we need a state of Israel side by side with the state of Palestine. Even my 17-year-old daughter,
Right.
I asked her, I said, what do you think, one state or two states? And she said, are you crazy? There's been so much violence, people need to be separated. So yes, we need a Jewish state and we need a Palestinian state, and there needs to be a long process of healing and reconciliation, which is already happening. There are many groups that work on that, and I completely support such groups that try to build the conversations and help the way forward.
Do you want to answer?
Oh, no.
No, you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, a question. You know, I would ask Denny and Reverend Jay, what is it that you can find in this resolution that offends you?
It doesn't offend me, it just doesn't satisfy me. It doesn't satisfy me because of what I just said. It's not really the solution. But what I find troubling, and yes, offensive, about this work on divestiture is part of the greater movement, which you referred to before, called BDS, which many of its leaders do not, in fact, recognize the right of Israel to exist. At your own booth yesterday, there are people, fellow Unitarian Universalists, who tried to persuade me that the Jews had no right to a homeland in Israel. It was like being raped. It was horrible. So, you know, we're so good at having AIWs and business resolutions that make us feel good. We're great at, oh, well, that's done. Now we can go home and feel good. It's just not enough.
And for me, I would say it doesn't, to me, it's very one-sided, and it's taking one side of this conflict, a war between two countries that's been going on for a long time. And it doesn't take into account the other side of the equation, which includes suicide bombings and bombing attacks from Hamas against Israel that lives in fear, and not just against Jews in Israel, it's against Arabs in Israel. Bombs are consistently, now they've found a way to defend themselves in some ways against it, so they can limit the damage, but they are consistently attacked by the Palestinian people. And so they have a right to defend themselves, and they do not have to, for once in the history of millennium, they do not have to be sacrificed. It's not okay to say it's okay for Jews to die. And we say they're not going to die. We want them, they want to live. And so they stand up for themselves. And I would like at least some recognition of that, if you ask, since you asked. You can clap, that's okay.
Are there other questions? I had a question. You talked about refuge. Can you share, I assume you've been to Israel?
No.
No, never, okay. Can you tell me what Israel, just the idea of Israel means for you in terms of refuge, even though you don't live there? You know, what does that mean for you?
So it comes from a history, a long history of oppression. And as my mother said to me many years ago, she said, just because you call yourself a Unitarian Universalist, they're still going to come for you if they come for the Jews. And so, and so it is a mindset of a place of last resort that nobody in Germany thought, I mean, they were integrated. They fought for Germany. They were integrated to the highest levels of society of Germany and many other countries, and were almost exterminated. Mm-hmm. And so there is always that fear. As we see the rise of a political right, a hate in our country here now today, it could very easily turn, as historically Christians have in the past, against Jews. And so it is a mindset of a place of last resort that we could go to.
Pharaoh, did you want to answer that question?
Well, I want to say, you know, this resolution is not an anti-Israel resolution. It's a resolution that's against these companies who are doing this in occupied Palestinian area. I'm very sensitive as a Jew to anti-Semitism as well. But you know, what's important in the future, this is as important to Israel and Israelis as it is to Palestinians. Because the moral fiber of Israel, if you don't know about it, you should find out, is going down and down and down with the Netanyahu government and others. And that's why this is important to show that this affects Israelis as well as it affects Palestinians. Not as much, because the Palestinians are the ones who are really suffering from the occupation. But the Israelis suffer too as a result of this incredible situation of imbalance, enormous imbalance in power.
I'm sad about the applause. We've turned it into a debate.
About,
I'm sad about the applause for one
Oh.
side or another.
Yeah.
you know,
That's-
I apologize. We hadn't talked about applause
It's just-
and reaction.
It's not what we were going to do.
Yeah, I guess we hadn't, we should have sort of maybe made some ground rules. I didn't expect it in some ways.
It
This
makes
is a
me sad.
public event.
Everything is a debate.
I hope that we're hearing some support for people and for the stories that you've told and for some of the deep sharing that you've given as well.
I have a question.
Yeah?
Could we just be silent for a while? Just all of us? Just for 10 seconds? Could we just be silent with it?
I appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to reflect. It's a deep part of this work, and it's an important part of it. Donna, I know that you had wanted to say something, and then maybe we'll wrap it up.
I was going to say, I had the same thought that Denny did when I was hearing the applause and some of the cheering, and I feel like maybe this is not the right thing to do in this discussion, and that maybe even during the debate on Saturday, we could refrain from clapping and cheering, because we're all one association, and I think we need to hold each other up in light and love, and the clapping and the applause, I really don't think it's needed.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for being here for the moment of reflection in silence. There's never a good time to end a conversation like this, and hopefully it won't end. Hopefully it will go from this out into the halls and will continue, and that will bring a similar kind of discernment, a similar kind of reflection, care for one another out into our conversations and into tomorrow's debate and beyond into the work of peace, which I think is, as it was expressed here, the goal of everybody. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I turn it back to the moderator,
Mr.
Jim.
Moderator.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists, for sure, for being honest, vulnerable, compassionate for the others on the platform. And thank John for, I think, a professional facilitation of a very, very sensitive subject. Applause is appropriate.